Angela Merkel's final term as Chancellor of Germany is now wrapping up. After 16 years, she outlasted 3 U.S. presidents, 4 British prime ministers, and 2 Canadian prime ministers. A stalwart of the European Union, where does her exit leave Germany now? With us on that, in Berlin, Germany, Michaela Küffner, Chief Political Editor at Deutsche Welle, or DW, a German public international broadcaster. She's also the host of the podcast Merkel's Last Dance. And in Calgary, Alberta, Petra Dolata, Professor of History at the University of Calgary. And we are delighted to welcome both of you to TVO tonight. Petra, it's good to see you again. You've been on before many years ago. Happy to have you both here. Let's start our conversation with an excerpt from Foreign Policy magazine describing the German Chancellor thus. Many glowing retrospectives on Merkel's tenure depict her as Europe's savior. When the Eurozone debt crisis threatened to overwhelm EU institutions, Merkel overcame domestic resistance to negotiate bailouts for the hardest-hit Eurozone members. When Vladimir Putin's Russia annexed Crimea and intervened militarily in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, she kept her cool and took the lead in negotiating the Minsk agreements. During the refugee crisis in the summer of 2015, she showed her humanity at considerable political cost by letting more than 1 million, mostly Syrian refugees into Germany. And during the spring of 2020, she threw her political weight behind the launch of a $913 billion pandemic recovery fund. That from Foreign Policy magazine. Okay, Petra, start us off here. When compared to other politicians, what is it about the way Merkel did politics that made her so successful?
I would think that she's one of the few leaders out there who is not following the new vogue of performative politics. I think she's always been true to herself. As someone mentioned, she's the adult in the room. She'll always be very well prepared. And at times where we have leaders who can be almost flamboyant, you think of Trump, you think of others, she has certainly had a leadership style that was based on evidence, sometimes to the detriment of quick decisions. But as we may say in retrospect, very often well-founded decisions. This also made her a very good crisis manager, if you will. Someone who can mediate, facilitate solutions in crisis moments. And that's probably her biggest strength. And she had quite a number of crises, as we have seen from this quotation.
Indeed. Michaela, I have seen you quoted as having said, stability is sexy in Germany. What did you mean by that?
It means that Germans would never be up for a political experiment like Donald Trump to just see what happens. What Germans like is that steady hand politics from Angela Merkel. She's also called Mutti here, mum. She tells you that everything is all right. And in fact, she has been a hugely successful leader and caretaker of Germany. And I choose the word caretaker because there are some gaps in what the quotations you just read out, because what we didn't get is Angela Merkel saying 16 years ago where she wanted to be with her leadership in 10 years or 15 years' time. And that's where the criticism comes from, accusing her of not really having a vision of where she wants to take a society. Here in Germany, she was the first leader who really recognized climate change as a key global threat. Also, digitization is something that needed to be tackled. This is all during her first term, 1.5 decades ago. And yet, just this year, we saw a constitutional court ruling essentially that she had done too little, too late, that she was not ambitious enough in her own climate policies. And on digitization, well, that is something that all parties discussing now who want to enter the post-Merkel government say where Germany urgently needs to do its homework. So she's at the same time very successful at tackling crises, but even when she recognizes issues that are more visionary, she doesn't really have the track record to back up a lot of the credit she's getting for what is, on the whole, very, very solid leadership.
Let me put that to Petra. Do you think it's a fair knock on Chancellor Merkel that she didn't come into office with a grand vision 16 years ago and has not governed in that fashion?
I think it's a bit unfair to tell sort of a leader and politician that they aren't very visionary. I think much of it depends also on what you can do. And while we're focusing here on Merkel, you also have to remember that in Germany, a chancellor is not like a president. We don't have a presidential system. So you always have to remember that there are a lot of things that she has to compromise on, both in terms of the political system. I mean, think about she has been in coalition governments. She needs to move, I think, in a way that this is still supported by a majority of the population. This is not to say that there have been instances where, because she was so well respected, she could have pushed a bit more. But equally, she's the leader of a party, the CDU, where we know that there's a lot of lobbying, for example, from corporations, energy companies, all these kind of things that also make it a lot more difficult to go ahead with visions. And I think you always have to, as a historian, it's kind of the thing where you say, well, could anyone have been able to do so? Anyone else in that situation, would they have even survived the 16 years? And yes, absolutely, she does not live up to a number of things that she has set out to do in the early 2000s. But then who else would have been able to navigate all those many crises? And so it's a bit philosophical as well, in the sense of, what do you rather want? A leader who actually is so well prepared and can negotiate and manage a lot of very difficult other leaders on the international scene? Or do you want someone who has a great vision? And certainly that's not, I think, the personality of Merkel either.
Well, we started by reading an excerpt from a foreign policy magazine piece, which was somewhat laudatory. This is from the same foreign policy piece, not quite so. Michaela, I'll get you to comment on this after I read it here. In approaching Europe's political crises, Merkel's main political stratagem has been to procrastinate and dither. Merkel became so famous for this approach that German teens turned her name into a verb, Merkeln, which became slang for chronic indecision and for saying or doing nothing on an issue. In almost every crisis, Merkel kicked the can down the road, hesitating to take big decisions until the last possible moment, and even then, often agreeing to doing just the minimum necessary to keep things from falling apart. Far more troubling was the substance of many of her policies, which we can simply label mercantilism, defined as the systematic prioritizing of German commercial and geo-economic interests over democratic and human rights values or intra-EU solidarity. Michaela, that's pretty harsh, but do you agree with it?
I don't wholeheartedly agree with it. What I'm really trying to do is illustrate how Merkel does politics and policies. And the Merkeling through is, yes, that is something she's infamous for, that she waits until the last moment. She doesn't preempt issues. And I would like to stay with the climate issue because she is a scientist. She listens to scientists. She does what is absolutely necessary. And that it was highlighted by her decisive action when the pandemic struck here in Germany. She did not hesitate 1 second. She did not promise that this is all going to be fine, like the British premier did and said, oh, it's all going to be contained. She listened to the scientists. She made sure they are at her side, and she acted immediately. There was no further ado. But when she tries to build consensus or with something complex like Europe, yes, she is someone who acts when action is absolutely needed, but she does wait until the last moment. And one illustration of that is her crossing her own red line of allowing the EU, the Commission, to take on debt directly, to make funds available to pay for the fallout of this pandemic, to allow Europe to come back on its feet. That was Merkel crossing her own red line that she'd held 1.5 decades long for fear of German taxpayers having to pay for debt taken on by other countries within the EU. So she moves when she absolutely has to, but when she doesn't, she tends to ride things out. And the last bit about values, that's her China policy. She believed in change through commercial interaction with China. The whole pandemic recovery here in Germany is actually funded to a large part by car sales in China. And when she was asked whether that was a mistake to believe that by having a joint commercial interest, by doing trade with China, you would be able to contain or change the system there, she chose not to answer. She said, well, it's time to look into the future. So she did not play hardball with China. And that's one of the big question marks over the future government, is whether there will be a more decisive line that is less in tune with the fine balancing out of own commercial interests as well.
Well, Petra, let me do one more follow-up on this, because we used to have a premier here in the province of Ontario back in the 1970s and 80s named Bill Davis, and people joked that his operating philosophy was never put off until tomorrow what you can avoid doing altogether. And now he won 4 straight elections and is widely perceived as being the most successful premier in the last half century. Could you say the same thing about Angela Merkel? Maybe she wasn't as fast and dynamic as some people wanted, but at the end of the day, she's got a pretty good record to look back on.
Yeah, and again, I wouldn't, you can look at it as you just sit back, do nothing, and wait and see, and only if really probed you make a decision. But the reference to her being a scientist is very important here. Now, scientists would try and weigh evidence and try and get as much evidence in as possible. And from what I hear, she's often been described as an active listener, for example. Not only is she someone who would go into meetings actually having read everything, and also being an active listener. So I do see her using her background as a scientist for her way of doing politics and policy, in the sense of, let me get all the evidence in as much as I can. Of course, that's also politically very useful, as you have described, but that sort of explains, and I see that in a more positive way, in an age where everything is 24/7, everything has to be done very quickly. Sometimes it may be useful to take the time, and she's certainly someone who uses that very academic approach, I admit, and it seems to be almost outdated at times, and especially when you then compare with leaders like Macron or others. But then just to come back to the climate change crisis, I think what she realizes that, yes, she is a scientist, but she's in a political position. And I think what she realizes is that in terms of the pandemic, that's something that can be done on a national/European level. I do think, and we have seen her successful coming out of the Paris Agreement, for example. I think what she realizes is that it is so difficult to push for a global action against climate change when you do not have a lot of allies elsewhere.
Michaela, I want to ask you whether, even with the leadership that she did provide, both in Europe and on the world stage over the last a decade and a half, do you think it's still the case that Germany is a reluctant world leader?
Yes, it is. And we saw that most recently in Afghanistan, which of course was a huge defeat for the West. And actually the German defense minister, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, who for a while was seen as a potential successor to Angela Merkel, said that she herself was surprised at how many people asked her that Europe would not be in a position to secure something like the airport of Kabul. Germany is still reluctant. It is an army that is bound by decisions of parliament. You need very broad majorities here to actually play the kind of power politics that are rather common in this shifting world order. Look at China, look at Russia, even look at the United States. There is a consensus, a public consensus, that a society is really behind its own armed forces. And that is something that is still political poison here in Germany to kickstart that debate. And that is also something that Angela Merkel didn't start. She did not push public debate in a direction to be able to really change gear globally, also in terms of where Germany wants to stand on security politics. And I'd just like to cite one example, because when Angela Merkel admitted that she didn't get as far as she wanted with her own climate policy, she explained it by saying, look, it is a democracy, you need to find majorities. And I then spoke to the leader of Fridays for Future here in Germany, who said, well, but politics shouldn't be about finding majorities, it's about creating majorities and convincing people to back the policies that you believe are right. And here, Angela Merkel actually has a track record of being shy to really force a public to debate issues that are way out of their own comfort zone.
Well, having said that, Michaela, before Merkel came to office, it wasn't that long before that people referred to Germany as the sick man of Europe. Germany is now undisputedly the most dynamic economy in all of Europe. They're a world leader in so many ways. Do you think that people are truly comfortable with Germany's power today and the way that Merkel has used it?
Yes, they are. And I dare say, I mean, we're now seeing her conservative CDU-CSU bloc crumble before our very eyes. She's left a huge void. Half of voters for the conservative CDU-CSU bloc the last time around voted for that party because of Angela Merkel. So there is a sense of mourning that this guarantee of stability is leaving the political stage. And that's also something that worked very successfully for her still current Vice-Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, from the Social Democrats, whose party came strongest, who actually is, at this stage, the most likely man to follow in her shoes as Chancellor, despite being from a different party, because he came across in a political campaign as the most Merkel-esque of the candidates available.
What does that mean?
That means the promise of stability. And that is also something that he had all over his election posters. He even did this on a photograph, despite being from a party that in the past has been the opposition to Angela Merkel.
I see. Okay. All right, Petra, in which case, can I get you to speak to that? If she has left this real hole of leadership and stability, which the world, and in particular Germany, counted on, how concerned do you think people in Germany are today, or maybe across Europe, about the fact that she is leaving and who knows what will follow?
I think they will be concerned, but there's a difference between Germans or Europeans looking at it. And I would like to come back to this idea of the reluctant world power. Germany will always be that reluctant world power, as we just heard. It's not something necessarily that Germans are interested in. They will not back any buildup of the military. They will not back up, more bigger roles for Germany in the world. What they're interested in is economic stability. And this is something that they have always related back to Merkel. This is why they also support, the finance minister under that system, who is Olaf Scholz. So I do think that, yes, they are concerned, but there's so many things that will decide the economic future of Germany that don't necessarily have to do with who exactly is in power. And this is where it becomes important to realize that Merkel, while not being a visionary European, has done everything in the past in actually the German national interest to support the European Union, because what she realizes, and I think that's what every follow-up chancellor will realize, is that that's where most likely the economic prosperity of Germany lies.
Petra, while you have the floor, can you just give us a brief lesson in how it works now? Because, of course, the elections have happened, and now the negotiations proceed to figure out who's going to be the next government. How does that exactly work over there?
Well, this is where it's not, I know some Canadians refer to this as minority governments. We don't vote for minority governments. So we vote not even for the chancellor, right? The chancellor is not elected by the Germans. But what Germans vote for is a direct candidate within their riding. And then they also have a second vote, which is for the party. And then we have an outcome which doesn't give majority to anyone in this case. And so currently what these parties have to do, they have to try and see that they create a majority, which then will elect the chancellor. And because of the way it has panned out this time, there are a number, or it really comes down, I guess, at the moment, to two possible coalition governments with always three partners. So what's happening at the moment is that those parties who numerically together could make up the majority are in negotiations. And I know we heard a promise by Olaf Scholz that this would be before Christmas, but there are a lot of people who also say this might take longer. And this is why we hear that Chancellor Angela Merkel might still give the New Year's address.
Well, Michaela, pick up the story if you would there, because I presume people thought the government would be established before that. But how possible do you think it is that, in fact, Merkel will be around for several more months to come?
Well, nobody this side of the Atlantic thought that. Last time it took half a year, with one failed attempt included. These are complex negotiations. Essentially, what we're seeing right now is the tail wagging the dog in German politics, because it's the two small parties who will definitely be in government, because they are definitely needed as coalition partners. And the big question is, who will lead it? Will it be Angela Merkel's Conservative Union, or will it be the Social Democrats led by Olaf Scholz, her current vice chancellor? And there you have the kind of element of continuity and stability that Germans like. Most Germans would like to see the Social Democrats at the helm of this, because they interpret that as that very stability. And I'm not sure whether it will be before Christmas, but I certainly won't be before November. But if there's one thing we learned during the last coalition talks, is that Germany has very strong institutions, and this is the price of our election system, which is all about proportionality. It doesn't produce all-out losers. It tries to be as inclusive as possible. And Germans certainly have the patience, and they've once before watched their country tick over quite nicely, even without a government in place. But one thing needs to be there for sure, and that's the policy priorities for the G7 presidency that Germany will take on at the beginning of next year. And there are, of course, French presidential elections coming up, and having France contesting elections and Germany not quite in government yet, that would weaken Europe, and that's what everybody knows, and that's what they're working up against.
In which case, Petra, let me follow up with you on that. Whoever becomes the next German chancellor and succeeds Angela Merkel, and whenever that happens, what would you say is the most daunting mission or responsibility that that person will have?
Well, as we have heard, Europe will remain a daunting challenge. The relationship with France, the outcome of those elections will also be important. And climate change, we've heard this over and over again. I think the biggest issue for me as a historian who's sometimes more interested in the long-term perspective is that we have this generational divide. We have a generation for who climate change is really the most important issue. But equally, we have an aging population in Germany, so that actually those over 50 will be the ones who will often decide who runs Germany. And I think that really will become increasingly a challenge. So domestic politics, it's easy to forget about those when you look from the outside, but that's also what really will drive and will create a lot of challenges for any new government in Germany.
Understood. Das war sehr interessant. Dankeschön. Das war ausgezeichnet. Michaela Kufner from Deutsche Welle and Petra Delata from the University of Calgary. Dankeschön. Auf Wiedersehen.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.